seeds on the ground. They'll find a way when they can plan it out. Then we'll stand around again, 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 and we can work it out. So I exit to the left, no, now to the right. I got a phone in my pocket, feeling alright. I don't have a note, you don't have a thing to say to me. Let's air it out. Let's plant seeds on the ground. They'll find a way when they can sprout it out. Then we'll stand around again, 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 and we can work it out. So I exit to the left, no, not to the right. I got a phone in my hustle, feeling alright. I don't have a note, you don't have a thing to say to me. And hold me up, I'm feeling like a teenager. And lift my boots, you know I'm adding 2 plus you. So I exit to the left, no, not to the right. I got a phone in this hustle, feeling alright. I don't have a note, you don't have a thing to say to me. Let's air it out. Oh, let's air it out. Oh, let's air it out. Oh, let's air it out. When we were young, tell them we were young. We never get discouraged. Read between the lines. When we were young, if only we were young, we never get nervous. It's all on the line. And if I were you, this life would be killing me. It's a goddamn lie. Hold it inside. When we were young, if only we were young, keep getting over and all the things we tried. When we were young, tell me we were young. And it's hard to get inward when you're out of your mind. And if I were you, life would be killing me. It's a goddamn lie. Hold it inside. When we were young, tell me we were young. And all of us are awkward in a matter of time. When we were young, told us we'd be young. We never ever knew we had at the time. When we were young.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Future Plymouth 2030. Our topic today is retrofitting and reuse. And again, we have some fantastic guests with us. First up, we have Paul Elliott, who's the Low Carbon Officer for Plymouth City Council. He'll be talking about his extensive experience on retrofitting homes for better improved performance. Next, we have Tim Mitchell from local practice Mitchell Architects, and he'll be discussing the transformation of a Dartmoor cottage to a more adapted low energy performing home without destroying the architectural heritage. And then finally, we have David Banner from Stride Treglown, who will be talking us through the planned reuse of InterCity Place with its commanding position over the train station in Plymouth, by repurposing it to make it more suitable for the university to use as a specialist training facility. Please stay to the end. We'd love to have you. We have a Q&A session where you'll be able to ask your question live to the panel. If you would prefer to type your question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Paul Elliott, who will talk through his presentation. Paul, over to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. And yeah, thank you for coming. I hope I can capture your interest and captivate your some enthusiasm over the next few minutes while I talk to you about something I've entitled Balanced Domestic Retrofit. So I'll share my screen a second. I only have a few slides. There we go. Okay, so hopefully you can now all see that. So just a brief introduction of me. So as Mar said, I'm in the low carbon city team for the council. I've been there since it started in 2012, and I do a variety of things in the team now. But you know, I started my low carbon journey with domestic energy efficiency, particularly from a fuel poverty point of view and health and housing type point of view, and it's kind of remained a soapbox of mine ever since, despite what the projects I might be involved in. So, but today my talk to you is about balanced domestic retrofit, and I think I'll get onto what I mean by that in a sec. I think it kind of sets the stall for the other two presentations today. It's not about an individual retrofit or about the specifics of what you might need to do on an individual retrofit. I think both Tim and David have got far greater detailed knowledge on that, and we'll go through some specifics in their discussions. So, but rather than that, it's about the balance required to achieve a sort of a citywide scale and indeed national scale, I suppose, retrofit if we're going to meet our climate emergency ambitions. So, I mean, to me, the retrofit industry is still very much in its infancy. So my talk is largely related to my own personal experience of running funded programs, both council funded, government funded, external pots of money, energy company pots of money. And those programs were done to try and build capacity in this area. As such, I'm really happy for comments, questions, challenges, please. I'm not too long in the tooth, despite my length of time I've been doing this, to learn some new stuff. So what do I mean by balanced domestic retrofit then? So, as a general kind of outlook to life, it's all about balance, isn't it? There's always competing priorities, there's always different demands, and we have to make choices according to those circumstances and those changing circumstances. So the scales that you can see on the screen there tip up and down depending on what the need is. And for me, trying to run projects surrounding the retrofit of domestic properties is exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is go through the three key things that make up that balancing act, if you like. So if nothing else, I think this slide demonstrates I'm not one for complicating things. But to me, all these 3 points that you can see on the screen are really the kind of key factors that you need to consider when you're looking at scaling up retrofit. So we've got how far and how much, we've got how fast, and we've got appetite. The how far is you know, it's not a distance-based thing. It's about the scale of ambition that drives the retrofit. It's linked very closely to the cost. The how fast is simply the timescales we're working to. Are we working to a 2030 target, a 2050 target? What are we looking at? And the appetite, well, this is a crucial factor, often overlooked factor in achieving any, you know, at scale domestic retrofit scheme. You know, we need people to want to do it for whatever reason. So I'm going to take each one of these in turn and talk a little bit more about it. So how far, how much? I mean, you know, very simply, the more we want to do to a property, the higher standards that we want to achieve, the more it's going to cost. I mean, that's a basic, you know, economical kind of equation there. And it kind of sounds, you know, it sounds so obvious that it's potentially not worth mentioning, but it really is, because actually the way current funding streams work from government and, as I said, energy companies and others, is that they're entirely driven by that cost factor. So the starting point of any scheme I've managed has always been, how much money is there to spend? That then dictates how far the measures can go on properties. There's an issue there, clearly, because what these programs don't do is start at the end point by saying, where do we need to get to, and then work back by allocating appropriate resource to get to that point. And you know, I get the again, the balance, competing demands that governments, etc., have to juggle. But if you don't start at where you want to get to, it's very difficult to actually get there. I'm just going to give a quick example of that. The current government target for retrofitting homes, I'll read it out. A target of ensuring as many houses to EPC Band C by 2035 where practical, cost-effective and affordable, and for all fuel-poor households, and as many rented homes as possible to reach the same standard by 2030. So in a nutshell, they want all properties to be retrofitted or to reach Band C by 2035. That's in the clean growth strategy that the Conservatives are currently working to. So quick poll, Miles, if you can call that up. Just want to check what percentage with you all of properties in Plymouth do you think require retrofitting in order to get to Band C? I don't know, Miles, if you're able to do that. So while Miles does that, have a think about it. So just want to gauge your opinion on how many properties you think need retrofitting in order to get to Band C. And we'll let that run and we'll pick it up a later slide. I mean, interestingly, on the face of it, you know, we're talking about what's driving your retrofit. Using the Band C rating seems a sensible way to go. Reaching Band C, you know, it's not carbon neutral, but it's some way there. But there is more than one way to reach a Band C, and this is part of the issue. So, you know, a scheme we're running at the minute requires us to reach Band C for up to 300 properties. Now, there's different ways we can do that. We could put some wall insulation on and install gas central heating, but do we want to be incentivizing fossil fuel heating? Probably not. We could provide some solar PV and put some new electric storage heaters in there, but that's ignoring the fabric first approach that we hold in such high regard. And this is where the balance issue really starts to bite. Becomes even more important to accurately pinpoint the driver and the reason for doing the work before you start. If you take, you know, installing gas central heating, clearly, if you want to be carbon neutral as a city, we don't want to be using fossil fuels to heat our homes. The issue there, though, is that for those in fuel poverty, gas central heating is still by far the cheapest way of getting someone out of a cold, damp home that they can't afford to keep warm. So there are, you know, big questions to ask yourself when you're doing this. So how fast? The timelines are pretty crucial. This series of webinars entitled, Future Plymouth with a 2030 target, which is, the target that we've set ourselves for carbon neutrality in terms of our climate emergency. But the clean growth strategy that I've just said about has a target of 2035 for doing something to properties. And the UK has a target of 2050 to reach that carbon neutral goal that we've spoke about. There's also, in terms of the funding we have timelines associated with the funding criteria. Our current scheme runs until June, so we have to get 300 properties to Band C by June. All of this is kind of conflicting with each other almost. So without a clear timeline for delivery, you will come up against barriers, against issues. I wonder, Miles, I'm not sure, how do we get the results of the poll up? I'm not sure, I can only see my screen at the minute, so let me escape a second.
So we've got 1%, 2% that say 42, Paul. We have 32% which say 61 and 66% that say 75.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so so the answer is 61%, which is not as bad as it could have been. I went for the middle ground. I wasn't sure how people would react to that, but let's just put that into context. So that's actually 77,000 properties, or if you prefer, if we start tomorrow, and this is a kind of phrase that's often bandied around, but if we start tomorrow, we've got to do 24 properties every day until 2030, which feels quite a lot, quite quick, to be honest. If we want to do it by 2035, we've got to do 15 every day from tomorrow. I didn't bother working out the 2050 one. I think you probably get the picture that there's the scaling up required to meet these targets that we're setting ourselves is pretty phenomenal. And so that's one of the areas that you really need to think about when you're considering a at scale approach. It's one of the areas that can tip the scales in terms of the balance. The third point is about appetite. So I've got a very sad looking empty plate on the slide there. The appetite's it's absolutely key, and it's often overlooked from a national policy perspective, because how do we get households when we're looking at, as I've just mentioned, 70,000+ homes? How do we get them to sign up to this? How do we get them to think this is a good idea? This is something I should be doing. I'm motivated to do it because of X, Y, and Z. Social housing, private rented sector housing has legislative tools to be able to do that. The owner-occupier sector, however, doesn't. And so looking at the numbers, 52,000 owner-occupier properties within the city need improving if they're going to get to Band C. And I should point out at this point, I'm only using Band C because it's a target that's set by government. It's not something that the council necessarily has signed up to, but it's a useful target to hang these kind of numbers off of, and these timescales to give you all an idea of the scale that's required and the thought that needs to be put into any large scale program, really. So how do you convince a homeowner to take the plunge, as it were, to install whatever measures are required to get to a band C? So I mean, it's not easy. That's the first point. There's always going to be early adopters. There's always going to be people that think it's exciting. Hopefully there's some on the webinar now, but it's not an easy win, particularly when those technologies and those measures are perhaps new and previously unseen. Just a couple of examples to demonstrate this. So we had a Green Deal community scheme, offered grants to households for solid wall insulation. It took us nearly 3 years to insulate 700 properties. Those are owner occupiers. We sent letters to 25,000 solid wall properties as part of that program. We had University of Plymouth. We had the government's own nudge unit, who are the people that try and cleverly word your car tax is due type letters, etc., to help us with trialing different types of letter, etc. And still, it took us that amount of time to generate that amount of interest. If we contrast that with a subsequent scheme that ran in 2018-19, that we ran in conjunction with Plymouth Energy Community. So they managed to visit and fit measures in 1,000 homes in under 18 months, which is far quicker. And when we look at the differences between the two schemes, it's that, I think it's that community approach that made a big difference. They were slightly smaller measures, they weren't full-on external wall insulation, so that's definitely an impact. But the really key thing was the coverage of that scheme got through word of mouth, through people talking to each other about the improvements that they'd had, benefit of those improvements, their neighbours, etc. It was an area-based approach. It worked really well, and I think that is an excellent route to take if you can achieve that when you're trying to scale up domestic retrofit. So I think that kind of demonstrates one of the best ways to increase appetite amongst the public. Once you get that appetite, of course, you've then got to be ready to capitalize on that. And ideally for that, you need incentives, you need trusted independent advice, and you need a skilled and a ready supply chain to be able to capture and capitalize on that motivated public. Those are the three key areas, I think, that of balance, if you like, that need to be considered. I mean, there's so many more factors that feed into how to retrofit a property, and as I've said, Tim and Dave will pick up on those, I'm absolutely sure. But to do it at scale, you really need to consider those. My final point is one around a key theme that it always throws things out of balance effectively. You've got three headlines on the screen in front of you. A Green Deal scheme did not deliver, hundreds of millions green grants pulled, amid MPs turn heating ministers amid boiler installation slowdown. They're all saying the same thing. Schemes have failed and are pulled and stopped. And what that does is it creates inconsistency in this industry. And that's a massive issue, because the inconsistency generates lack of confidence. Time and time again, we see local companies not being able to continue work and effectively going bankrupt because the funding that was promised, a funding delivery, timescale that was promised, is pulled. The most recent one, the Green Homes Grant scheme, run by the government, millions has been pulled from that because of lack of delivery. And the more government centralise their thoughts on this, I don't see any change. I want to effectively blow our own trumpet in a council. We want to be involved as much as we can, but at the same time, doing this, of delivering, and the more funding / control government can give to not just the council but local area groups effectively, the greater the take up of this domestic retrofit is going to be. The irony in this is the only consistency that we see here is the inconsistency of the schemes. The boom and bust type approach, it just doesn't work. It doesn't help the supply chain. It doesn't generate the capacity and the skills that we need. The colleges to run apprenticeship programs, to help students, etc., gain those skills to be able to deliver this over the next however many years, because we've seen that we need to do 24 a day from tomorrow in Plymouth if we're going to get to 2030, and there's no way we have that kind of capacity in the city or nationally, I'd suggest. So I wanted to really highlight the inconsistency of funding and how that hampers our cause when we're looking at domestic retrofit. And that is me. So thank you for that. I'm really happy to take comments and questions, etc. At the end. But yeah, thank you all for listening.
Thanks so much, Paul. You probably all have some really great questions for him, so please keep them coming in by pressing the Q&A button. Or if you would like to ask your question at the end, please feel free to click the raise hand button actually, so I know who to pick at the end. So next we have Tim Mitchell from Mitchell Architects, who will be discussing the transformation of Dartmoor Cottage. So over to you, Tim.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, right. Okay, excellent. I believe you should be able to see this. And hopefully my name pops up on the screen there. Okay, assuming you can see that. Hello, my name's Tim Mitchell. I'm an associate with Mitchell Architects. We are based in Plymouth. We're a local firm and we work in a variety of sectors, but also happen to be one of the country's leading designers of passive house projects, particularly affordable passive house schemes and increasingly Nppf, which is what I'm going to be talking to you about today. First, though, I thought I'd mention a building that is actually home for some of the sponsors of this lecture. That's the Sustainability Hub at the University of Plymouth. We were the architects for the refurbishment of the building, transforming it into what you can see here. It's home to the Low Carbon Devon Project and the Sustainable Earth Institute. The building itself is actually used as a live research project as well. The refurbishment was utilized a RACS SCAR rating system, achieving the highest gold rating. This system assesses the environmental impact of altering existing elements of the building, and thus it encourages informed and environmentally conscientious design decisions. It's an effective tool which reduces the environmental impact of refurbishment, and it's something that we hope to combine with what I'm here to talk about today, and that's Nppf. First, let's just quickly go through an outline of why we need to refurbish existing buildings. I don't really need to say anything about global warming, you all know that, but I do want to quickly elaborate on why the domestic sector has such an important role in reducing its impact, and also how it affects the UK national energy security. Proportionally, the domestic sectors makes up over 30% of the national energy usage, which is quite significant. Of that use, space heating makes up the largest proportion. If you include hot water in that, the overall energy used for heating is actually 69%, which by my rough maths equates to just over a fifth of all UK energy use. Clearly, heating within domestic properties offers significant opportunity and challenge in reducing the UK's climate impact. The challenge in simply greening heating systems is massive though. Whilst electrical heating systems are improving, reducing their global warming impact through heat pumps and the greenification of the national grid, the simple fact remains that around 85% of homes are still heated using gas. This is evidenced by the fact that the domestic sector uses more gas than any other, including electricity generation. Letty recently made an interesting investigation into the options for replacing supplies of natural gas with more environmentally friendly hydrogen. But they point out that inefficiencies which appear to show that turning to hydrogen using the industry preferred system of blue, which is using gas to create gas, is actually less efficient than just using natural gas itself. They also emphasise that the conversion, delivery and combustion has between about a third and 1/6 the efficiency of the alternatives, such as heat pumps, especially heat pumps that are supplied by renewable electricity, as you can see in this diagram here. So basically, hydrogen replacement is a long way off still, and if we're going to have any meaningful impact over the next decade, when it counts, one would presume that it means switching from gas to electricity. Now, you'll have to forgive my rather crude maths here, but I've used a study that was published in 2017, which investigated the impact of the mass uptake of heat pumps on the national grid. The study's estimated increase in the peak electricity demand can be scaled up to the circa 85% of homes currently without gas, and you'd see an increased peak demand of almost 60%. And I'd suggest that this is well beyond the beleaguered national grid's capability, particularly with the increasing uptake of electric vehicles. It's clear that there is no one-size-fits-all solution to the issues of energy use anywhere, yet the domestic sector's energy use issue has a relatively simple sounding option to help out, and one which I would say is absolutely essential if we're going to meet our carbon reduction targets. That is, reduce energy demand through improving the quality of existing buildings. So we'll be improving using insulation, reducing drafts, reducing damp, improving heat recovery, etc. There is, though, by no means a simple task. This is in a completed building that's being lived in. The Environmental Change Institute suggested back in 2005 that it would be more effective and simpler to achieve this by demolishing inefficient older buildings and replacing them with high efficiency new build alternatives. They pointed out that the vast majority of older homes in the country are not protected in any way, and so could be demolished for this cause. Thankfully, for the most part, this has not been taken up en masse, unless you include tower blocks perhaps, but the importance of, and also the importance of embodied carbon in existing materials is now also better appreciated. I won't even go into what the impact on communities and such like it would be. So, how can we achieve this without losing much of the important architectural character which makes such an important part of our identity? And how do we do it efficiently and effectively with results that are worthwhile? There are clearly issues with simply cladding the outside of characterful buildings with insulation and the like, and also concepts like damp bridging cavity walls with insulation aren't great either. So we're architects, we're out in the real world and love a challenge. Well, let's take an old building as an example, see what can be done to make it more energy efficient and more healthy to live in. In fact, let's take what I would consider to be not just an extreme example, but perhaps the worst case example. It's a dilapidated yet interesting historic home in the heart of Dartmoor. It's called Cottage. We're not quite sure when it was built, but it predates the earliest OS maps. It's constructed of granite, surprisingly, being on Dartmoor, and has experienced numerous alterations throughout its life. Here it is in the 1970s with a new lick of paint on its concrete rendered walls and some crinkly tin roofing, which actually dates from the 1930s and it was still there when we arrived a few years ago. The roof also included numerous ventilation holes, which the occupants said allowed the winter snow to settle in piles atop a thin layer of loft insulation inside the roof, which is pleasant. Oh, and it also had things like dormer windows and areas of wall where the only protection from the harsh winter weather in Dartmoor was a layer of crinkly tin and a sort of a 9mm piece of plasterboard, so not great. So despite being quaint, the cottage suffered from chronic damp, has used huge amounts of heating oil and wood, even to reach the lowest temperatures in winter. And despite having leaky single glazed windows and a super leaky fabric, ventilation was not sufficient to keep damp levels down. Concrete render externally and gypsum plaster internally had left walls with no ability to dry out. Combined with the relatively extreme external temperatures and its inclement weather, it made for a very unhealthy living environment inside. In fact, the condition inside was so bad that one of the tendering contractors, after visiting the site, asked me for how many years it had been left empty, when in fact actually the tenants had only moved out the week before. So not great. The cottage was purchased by the Duchy of Cornwall a few years ago. In defence to the purchasing decision, it actually came as part of an ancillary part of the adjacent Archton House estate. And we've seen here on this rather dramatic setting near Postbridge. Archton Cottage is just off to the right of this photo. As I mentioned, the cottage was received in quite a state, but luckily the enlightened Duchy technician who commissioned us wanted us to make this an example of what could be done to improve the energy efficiency of buildings owned by the Duchy elsewhere. Having worked with us on previous Passivhaus schemes in the past, he asked us to look at the cottage with an eye to achieve Passivhaus Retrofit. Many of you will have heard of Passivhaus. Its methodical approach to construction and design can create buildings which are so energy efficient that the passive heat from occupants and electrical equipment and a very small heating system is sufficient to keep them warm even in the harshest of environments. Consultants liken a Passivhaus building to a thermos flask full of hot coffee, which stays warm for a long time because it's insulated and airtight. And you can compare that to a normal house, which might be more like a glass coffee jug and needs a hot plate under it, applying heat continuously to keep it warm. It's so efficient, actually, the Passivhaus system, that I've heard a story of a couple living above the snow line in Germany who were a bit chilly in their Passivhaus home midwinter, and so they bought a 100-watt dog, and it topped up the temperature nicely for them. So the Passivhaus and Retrofit systems are great because they're numerically assessed using tried and tested benchmarks. They're proven in the real world. There's none of this finger in the air stuff that we're so often used to in construction. So what does it mean for the building occupants? It means a comfortable space, no mold growth as all the surfaces are warm, there are no drafts, no cold radiating off the windows in winter, no low heating bills, and controllable fresh air. And also, despite what you may have heard, you can open the windows. So the Passivhaus lot, recognising that the stringent design criteria of full Passivhaus are not always achievable in retrofit and refurbishment projects, created an alternative system based on the same principles called Nppf. This system is available in one of two options: by designing the building to meet a maximum annual energy use per square metre of floor space, or by analysing building elements one by one and making them achieve the best possible energy efficiency within real-world limitations. The latter method is effectively a target to achieve the best possible efficiency results without destroying the existing building in the process, and thus we chose it for Archton. To achieve benefit, we and our client teamed up with Warm, who we've had a long and successful working relationship with. As a team, we developed a strategic approach to the design and applied this from concept through to completion. Through our joint analysis with the component method system in mind, we knew that the roof, windows, and ventilation system could meet new build Passivhaus standard. However, the lime render air tightness line that we were pretty sure could be achieved by the builder was in question. The walls, reveals, and floor would be much more challenging though, and cue troublesome planning process and detailed design, and the proposals go out with the original and in with the traditional looking, but technically advanced. The enhanced internal space arrangements, removal of recent poor quality alterations such as a second chimney and bay window, and a focus on retention of original features. There's a building-wide airtight line along the internal skin of the fabric, insulation on all the internal faces, triple glazed windows and doors, solar vacuum tubes for the hot water, and mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. And then finally, add to that a nice wood burning stove with a back boiler, and yes, they still exist, which is needed for heating in the midwinter cold. So Warm did some calculations which suggested that if the building were heated to 20 degrees Celsius in its original state, it would have cost £2,322 in wood, as that's one of the main heating systems. Because the condition of the building was so poor though, it was challenging to calculate exactly how bad it would really perform. So in reality, it would probably be extremely difficult even to reach 20 degrees and probably cost significantly more than that. The new proposals would see at least an 85% reduction in heating demand, along with all the associated benefits of a healthier internal environment and reduced carbon output. So how hard was it to achieve these things in construction? Well, at this point, it's actually worth noting that our client's boss had certain aspirations for the promotion of traditional architecture and construction, which you may well know. Some of the problems of the loss of these skills are actually proven in the building of this scheme, funnily enough. So let's start with the Granite. We were extremely lucky to have a very skilled stonemason on site full time who was able to work with and protect the existing masonry throughout the build. We were also lucky to have a chap who'd spent time digging quarries, granite quarries specifically, and digging through 400 millimeters of solid granite, which was just below the floor, is not going to be easy at the best of times, let alone when halfway through the dig you have half of Dartmoor draining through the walls and then promptly freezing solid in the building with no windows. And as you can imagine, it was quite a tough winter for RM builders. Another skill set was plastering. We specified lime plasters and lime render throughout. Finding people capable or willing to work with lime was challenging for the contractor. We were using lime due to its vapor permeability. In complete contrast to concrete render and gypsum plaster, it has this fantastic capability of allowing moisture to escape from the masonry within the walls, allowing them to keep dry. Yet externally, when combined with a lime wash or a silicate paint, will keep the water droplets away. Working with the company Natural Building Technologies, we used this asset with a carefully specified wood fibre insulation internally to ensure interstitial condensation would not form on the cold wall on the outside. Structural elements such as the ridge beams and internal floor beams and lintels were timber, as it meant they could pass through the internal line of insulation without forming so much as a cold bridge as something like steel or concrete. And this also, of course, like the insulation, helped reduce the embodied carbon of the build further. The order of construction is huge importance. We needed to make sure that the contractor knew what to do and when, so that things like the airtight line were not penetrated due to latter works. And that's something we ensured from the very start of the tender process. For instance, penetrations through the external insulation are always going to be a challenge, particularly where it meant passing through the incredibly important airtight line. An interesting detail here is the where a pair of mechanically laminated glulam beams required a hole to be drilled down the joint between the two and filled with an airtight sealant near the ends prior to being fitted into the wall. And that ensured that air didn't pass down between the two beams and then out through the airtight line on the other side. And this sort of detail would be impossible once the beams were installed. Quality of construction is paramount for Passivhaus and Nppf, and we were very lucky to have an excellent team from RM builders. Importantly, a no-blame culture on site is absolutely essential. If the contractor makes a mistake, penetrates the airtight line and doesn't tell someone, it could spell disaster for the whole project. This also applies to unknowns, which is why 2 pressure tests are done on the building. First is done after the airtight line is complete, so that any problems that with it can be fixed prior to covering it up. The second is done upon completion, which forms the final data entry for the Nppf certification. So air tests are normally reported in terms of air permeability, like that used in SAP ratings. We're normally seeing something around sort of 5 for new builds at the moment, though for some reason there's no requirement to have them on refurbs. As an example of an older building, let's say a typical Victorian house with draft strip sash windows and inflatable chimney seals, that could probably reach an air tightness of 10, and it's probably better than many new builds even now. Archton, though, came in on its final test with an amazing 0.58, which we were quite pleased with, as you can imagine. Nppf, though, requires a slightly different measurement, and changing it to an air change rate at a specific pressure of 50 pascals. It has to be less than 1, and again, Archton did superbly at 0.72. So air tightness of this level in a historic stone building of this nature is testament to what is possible with high quality workmanship and pragmatic good design. Of course, with an airtight building, mechanical ventilation is essential. Passivhaus works on super high air tightness, so that absolute control can be had over the heat loss through air replacement. A balanced building-wide ventilation system is used and passes through a heat recovery system. This extracts up to 92% of the heat from the outgoing air and then pushes it into the fresh incoming airstream. The results are minimized energy loss whilst maintaining an extremely well ventilated, healthy and comfortable internal environment. But of course, consideration of the duct routing must be made from early in the designs to ensure you don't build yourself into an impenetrable corner. The results, they've been well received by the client, and the overall improvement to the building is immediately apparent without even taking into account the energy improvements. Internally, what was once a dark, cold, damp hole is now bright and cozy. Original features within the building, such as the giant chimney, which seems to take up half the floor footprint, are retained. High quality windows and doors will outlast almost all other contemporary fittings of a lower specification, and it reduces the whole life environmental impact notably. Externally, the building appearance is improved with traditional materials used, which actually, funnily enough, outperform modern substitutes. And for the new residents, the project has been a success too. It's a healthy environment in which to be, free from drafts and cold surfaces, a complete contrast to the original. That said, the building is still drying out. This is its first winter now. We think once it's fully dried out, it will be feeling much warmer next winter as well. There's also an element of the occupants getting used to using a wood burner as the main heating source in the winter. The wood burner was actually a client request item, and was not something that we would do now, particularly noting the particulate and carbon monoxide production associated with it. The very low heat demand of the building, though, would suit an air source heat pump as an alternative, and this can be retrofitted to the building at any point in the future. So happily, the building has achieved official Passivhaus Institute Nppf certification, meaning it can have one of those nice little certification signs attached to the outside. It means that the team have turned the building, which was probably not much more efficient than it was when it was built hundreds of years ago, into one of the most energy efficient homes around. We have improved the health of the internal environment exponentially and reduced heating energy use by up to 85%. All this in what is probably one of the most challenging Nppf projects ever done. So costs, well, spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on refurbishment just to improve the energy efficiency is not going to be very financially appealing, admittedly. However, when looked at as a top-up to making the building habitable again, it was somewhat more palatable at sort of 15 to 20%. It's thought that being energy efficient adds only a negligible appreciation to the rental value for the duchy, and this is reflected in the sales literature, where after all this huge effort, it's sad that nothing much is made of the Untitled certification other than the one line that I've got an arrow going to there. It's perhaps reflective of the relatively low cost of energy right now. It's not a bigger deal, and it perhaps isn't helped by poor public knowledge of energy efficiency. And let's take, for instance, the EPC system, which seems to be a bit of a joke for existing buildings, if you don't mind me saying. So the band D, I hear you ask, I mean, that's the wrong certificate, right? Well, the original certificate was band D. Here it is. This is for the single glazed, damp-ridden whole of a house. So after hundreds of thousands of pounds spent and a huge amount of effort to make it as energy efficient as absolutely possible, the new EPC was upgraded all the way to, you guessed it, as you just seen it, D. So it raised by 3 points and still in D. Oh, and the potential for the building is now dropped by 7 points. It's still B, but you can only achieve that if you stick a wind turbine on the roof and PV cells. This, to my mind, suggests that EPC isn't really worth the PDF it's written on for the existing buildings, and no wonder most of the public don't really seem to give two hoots about them when buying a house. Would the house have gained an increased rental value if it had an A rating? It's debatable. It's my opinion that until energy prices rise significantly or legislation improves massively, Joe public probably aren't going to be hugely fussed about putting anything more than government subsidised efforts into making their homes more energy efficient. Going back to the earlier topic of discussion, whilst this might be fine in the short term for everyone, it's going to prove a very tricky sticking point for policymakers and government green agenda targets during the switch away from gas. That said, though, in summary, it is possible to do energy improvements, and they needn't cost the earth and involve stripping the entire building back to its core like we did. Using systems such as Retrofit, individual elements can be upgraded piecemeal as funds and opportunity arise over the coming years. We're currently working in such a way on this terraced house in Plymouth right now. Retrofit ensures that an informed approach is taken based on proven evidence, and so that the decisions made aren't wasted money in the long run, and the end results are good, and it can be added up to a complete building system at the very end. And yeah, that's the end of my little chat. I hope you haven't bored you with figures nor shocked you with costs, but I hope that you're also encouraged that we can achieve such energy efficiency in the harshest of situations, so almost everything else will be easier. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. That's so interested about the EPC.
Yeah,
I've certainly never seen an A or B. Have you, being an architect, have you ever seen them before?
not on no, not really. I don't think so. I think we have achieved it a couple of times, but I don't know quite why.
Unbelievable. Yeah, but that was lovely. That was an amazing project. Thanks for sharing that, Tim.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Please keep your questions coming in, clicking the Q&A button or raising your hand to ask the question direct. So next we have David Banner. He's from Stride Treglown, and he'll be talking about the planned use for InterCity Place by Plymouth train station. So over to you, David.
Thanks, Miles. I'm just trying to share my screen. Oh. Hopefully that's working. Yep, I'll assume it is. Hi all, so my name's David Banner. I'm going to give a bit of a summary of the project we've been working on over the last few years at InterCity Place. So you probably all recognise it. It's at Plymouth train station. So my name's David Banner, as I said, and I'm a senior associate architect from the Plymouth and Truro office for Stride Treglown. I started back as a sort of part one student, went to Plymouth University and have been with Strides ever since. I've got a background in education projects. I've also done a fair few sort of residential apartment buildings, student accommodation, and more recently some COVID testing labs, which was pretty interesting. Probably the most sort of interesting recent project I've been working on is a Pathfinder project for the DFE for a net zero carbon in operation school. So hopefully at some point I can share a bit more information about that with you as well. So a little bit more about Strides. We've got sort of a vast breadth and depth of knowledge in terms of kind of creative reuse. And one of the kind of key projects that I wanted to kind of raise was the University of Reading Library. And so that is currently up for a shortlisted for an AJ Retrofit Award in the higher and further education category, and that's being decided as we speak, I think. So hopefully we'll do all right with that. I wanted to raise this one because it's a similar 1960s building, similar kind of badly maintained and failing facade, and this is what we managed to achieve. We needed to do a fair bit of remodeling of the structure and significant rework, but we've brought it back into the 21st century, and it's much like the project I'm going to talk about. So I wanted to just give a bit of a talk about the work we're doing with InterCity Place. It's kind of just to give you an overview, really, and just talk about sort of repurposing a 1960s structure and the challenges of working with that old structure. And then I'll just give a little bit of a summary of the kind of integration with the wider master plan. I'll touch on the sustainable advantages because there are some significant advantages, and I'll just touch on sort of a few thoughts, just something to perhaps leave you with. So the project began back in 2017, and it wasn't actually anything to do with InterCity Place at the time. We were looking at the site kind of as you kind of approach the station from Armada Way, the sort of route straight up through. There's a site next to what is Tower Cabs and the back end of the multi-storey car park. And so that site was designated as part of a much wider master plan for the university we're looking at, and then the sort of station and Network Rail and City Council were all looking at as well. So we were identified to work with that site. And this was part of a sort of £80 million investment for what is now Brunel Plaza, and a real kind of improvement to the sort of gateway to Britain's ocean city. So a really exciting project. In terms of what we were trying to achieve here, it's the business case was for an expanding school of nursing and midwifery, and then relocating the School of Health Professionals. They're based up at the Marjon campus, and so we were looking to bring them back down to the main campus and sort of integrate them within the whole kind of Faculty of Health and Human Sciences. So as I say, the master plan was something that was evolving, and the multi-storey car park site wasn't going to come free. So all of a sudden we started to sort of discuss the use of InterCity House. It wasn't at the time sort of, there wasn't a plan for it. I don't think. It was hoped that with some of the kind of wider investment, something would come along and take that, you know, bit of general investment would sort of spark further investment as such. So we kind of looked at it and thought, well, yeah, okay, I think we can make this work. At the time we were looking at 2A1 as well, as you see here, and it was a smaller site. So we thought, combined with the kind of 2, we could probably make it work. It would mean a little bit of compromise, but with some of the teaching space not sort of making its way into this sort of phase, and then some of that coming with 2A2 later. So we knew, looking at InterCity House, it was going to be a bit of a challenge. It has a narrow plan. Immediately you've got a sort of difficult net to gross ratio, but over 10 floors, we thought that could probably work quite well. The structure would be pretty inflexible. It's a 1960s structure. It's going to be pretty hard to work with, so we were going to have to keep that as existing as much as possible. One of the biggest challenges would be the cladding. So the cladding was, again, original and very lightweight. As a result, really not very fit for much use anymore, and we would have to put something new back. But we were very constrained by the kind of it being originally lightweight. We'd have to put something quite lightweight back. So in terms of the thermal envelope, that would become quite a challenge actually. But we really recognised this was a real opportunity to build in such a good location, and as part of what is really quite a landmark building. So the building was opened in 1962 by Dr. Beeching. It's part of, it was built by British Rail between 1956 and 1962. And it was a reconstruction for the station as part of a plan for Plymouth. And it was part of the wider Abercrombie plan. The building's 10 stories, 11 if you include the roof. And it's over 45 meters high. So the views from the top are pretty phenomenal. In terms of the existing structure, it's pretty good to work with as well. So it's, I think, 3.6 meters floor to floor, which is a great, in today's day and age, you don't tend to work to that standard. So that was a good starting point. And it also had some real character. So 1960s character, terrazzo flooring throughout the stair cores, some lovely sort of timber detailing in places. And so we thought there's some character we can sort of try and retain here. Sadly, though, it's barely insulated, suffers completely from overheating in the during the summer, with it being east-west facing, and very noisy, and utilizes a natural vent strategy. So being windy in Plymouth, sort of, and openable windows, it overheating because you've got sort of office paper everywhere. So we knew that strategy was not one that we'd be able to kind of replicate. In terms of the building kind of and kind of thinking about creative reuse, this had been planned, or had been looked at for sort of work in the past, but I think people had sort of shied away, and so it had also been considered for demolition. So we sort of felt that actually we were doing quite a good thing here by sort of saving it from demolition, and working so close to a railway to sort of build something new would probably be quite a bad move, really, in terms of the amount of work you'd have to do, and demolition works so close to a railway. So most of us probably know it now as a bit of an eyesore. It's very tired and it could do with a bit of work. But if you ask probably anybody who travels a bit further west, if they know of the building, and they certainly do, it is a landmark building, and it's well, yeah, it is the gateway to Plymouth if you arrive by rail. So for us, it was a real opportunity. That said, it wasn't without its challenges. As soon as we got in and started to look at it, we noticed that the columns are all inset by a meter. So not only have we got a sort of narrow floor plate, it's even further narrowed by the columns. And the columns, there's not a lot we could do with them. So that presented a challenge in itself. That said, the stair cores were really good. The lift cores were good. So we knew we had to replace the lifts, but we weren't having to do any sort of significant works there. We also knew, in terms of fire escape, occupancy numbers were pretty good because it had been designed as an office block. So as I say, we're kind of quite excited by this opportunity, really. We really saw it as a gateway to the city, and actually a really good kind of strong link between the university and the city, and starting to kind of concentrate the university's efforts and sort of really integrate with the city a little bit more. It potentially had the opportunity to save a little bit on capital cost as well. If we're not building on 2A2, then actually we don't have to build a structure, we don't have to do any work in the ground. There was a potential saving there. And as I said, we probably wouldn't get such a great location, so close to a station, and so well suited to a sort of school of nursing who draw from all over Devon and Cornwall. So we started looking at archive plans, and the archive plans were quite challenging to work with, but we pretty soon we could kind of create a good, strong feasibility study and get a good idea that this was quite a viable scheme. The net to gross area was proving quite tricky. We were hitting about 60 to 70% ratio, which isn't ideal. We were working some of the spaces quite hard, so utilizing the whole of the floor plate and sort of not penetrating it with a sort of corridor. So that had its challenges. We were working quite hard with the university to kind of talk through that, and they seemed to be quite engaged with it and thought it was viable as well. So there were definitely kind of considerations of strategy in terms of servicing and WCs, and actually some of that seemed, on face value, seemed to work quite positively. So we thought, there's some real opportunity here to sort of recycle some of those existing building strategies and sort of follow that through. So in terms of the kind of the plan for the building, it was clear that we could reuse it. And as you can see from this diagram, at one point, it was quite clearly not part of the wider plan to kind of retain it. And so we set about a sort of RIBA stage 2. We kind of had rejigged our schedule of area. And at that point, I think it become clear that the 2A1 site would not house quite as much stuff as we'd like. So we were pretty adamant that this was a really strong option for us. I think it's also important to say that we had to work quite hard with the wider master plan. I know this is perhaps not so much a kind of about the building, but in terms of creative reuse, it's about that wider impact. And so we really had to sort of our planning team and master planning team worked with the university, and we also kind of inputted on things like there was a proposed multi-storey car park within about 5 meters of InterCity House at one point. And so we kind of had to work to say, look, have you thought about the implications of spread of flame between the two buildings and that being a car park? And so, we worked through with them and sort of explained that this needed to be there needed to be a better separation distance. And that would also encourage a better public realm at the ground floor, which kind of led us to the idea that we could really improve the public realm and create better entrances. So access into the building wasn't ideal. It's up steps. You've probably seen them as you walk past the station. They're kind of people congregate around them. Some of the sort of people you may want to congregate around them. So we thought encouraging a bit of sort of public use and public engagement would be a really strong thing. We kind of orientated some entrances to tie in with what would become or probably will become a walkway straight from Armada Way right up through down through the 2A site and then kind of straight towards this building. So we thought starting to engage with that, and so we included a cafe as part of that process. Sadly, the amount of work needed in and around the station concourse and access, and then kind of associated works to the Risk building, which is next door currently, kind of put paid some of this for now. And so we rationalized our proposal as we went to kind of simplify the entrance into the building, but it doesn't mean that the public realm and won't eventually become available. So I think we've done quite a bit of work to kind of encourage that. I wanted to also touch on stakeholder engagement. As you probably alluded, or as I've alluded to, you've probably figured out getting big kind of specialist teaching spaces into an existing building isn't probably the easiest thing to do. So we had to work quite hard with the teaching staff, the technicians, and the numerous university stakeholders, so security teams and so on, to kind of talk them through the building plans and really understand how they were intending to use it. We spent a lot of time with them up at their existing facilities and day-long workshops with them to kind of work out how they worked, and so we could sort of properly repurpose this building to be fully functional. And I think that was a reason I've got Bristol Business School up, is because that was born out of something we had done at Bristol Business School. And actually we'd also challenged them. We challenged them to kind of look at space and use it differently. We challenged them to think about modern teaching methods, maybe more agile working. We'd created more flexible kind of breakout space. And so we actually took them up to see this building, and they were kind of sort of suddenly kind of realized that actually these were really popular, well-used spaces. So it was a real sort of lesson in terms of engagement and making sure that we were all working together to kind of for a better outcome, really. So we got sort of concluded our IBA stage 2 in about August 2018 with ourselves, Mace, Atkins and Mott McDonald's. And so we got to a point where we knew further surveys would be needed, and we kind of needed a lot more input from a contractor really to take it further forward. So we had started to kind of engage with them through a sort of two-stage tender process, and through that process Kia were appointed. But in the meantime, the 2A1 site had become sort of unfeasible for various reasons. So at that point, we kind of paused the tender process, held back on that, and then started to kind of develop stage 3, re-looking at a schedule of area completely afresh almost. What we did was sort of really focus our attention on the specialist teaching spaces and got them all to work within the building. And actually some of that's still ongoing, but the reality of it was all of that fitted. We got a huge amount of office space still, but we persuaded the university that agile working was the kind of best way to kind of overcome the shortcomings with space. And then what we did was say, look, you've got a huge amount of teaching space on campus. Some of that's underutilized. So a bit of give and take, probably quite a bit of compromise on their part. And we got to the point where actually they could make this building very viable. So we kind of thought, yeah, okay, so we've done that, and we need to now develop this a bit further. So we took on the stage 3. At the same time, the university decided to introduce an RIBA competition for the facade design, and that was something that they thought would really kind of work well with the landmark building. So they kept us on to really develop the floor plates and looking at all of that. So Micah came in as part of that through that competition with this entry, which worked really well. It's a very elegant solution. It also started to challenge the design a little bit. So it rationalized some of the ground floor spaces a little, but it also started to challenge some of the 10th floor. And so the idea of a sky garden and some meeting rooms on the 10th floor was put forward, and then trying to make it a bit more of a beacon at night. So using a lit handrail and using the stair cores and to sort of really make them glow at night. And so there's some really lovely ideas, some strong concepts there. We were, because we knew that some of the structure was a little bit iffy on the top floor, we were a bit nervous about how we'd integrate some of those. So we left them in and put them forward for the planning application, but we're very mindful that they kind of needed to be sort of treated with a bit of a pinch of salt, in a way. So Micah had developed a kind of bespoke curtain walling system in a way. It was because of the way the structure worked, it had to be a very simple curtain walling system, but what they'd done is put a lightweight aluminium capping on it in essence. They'd worked with their own servicing engineers and had developed a slightly different strategy for natural ventilation. So there was a net vent solution, which when they came on board, we decided to go back to a sort of central plant solution on the sort of top floors. But broadly speaking, it was all working quite well. So the other thing to sort of say was that the cladding was an anodized aluminium, and so one of the main issues with building so close to a railway is glare, and so we knew that glare would be an issue for this project, and so trying to minimize reflections and so on was something that the Micah had considered really nicely with this what is quite an elegant facade solution. It would also minimize solar gain, but so the protruding aluminium elements would allow a sort of depth, a bit like a brise-soleil, but we'd kind of worked with Mott MacDonald in developing a brief for the RBA competition to sort of say, actually, performance spec would suggest that it should be some form of glass treatment. So maintenance would be fairly straightforward and it would be maintainable. It's not an easy building to maintain given access and so on and height. So Micah kind of took that on board and developed the brise-soleil type effect, but as part of the cladding system. So it would be cleaned with windows. So the east side has you can see a kind of 2 bays wide cladding depth, and then on the west side they're every bay, so you have a different view of it from east and west. And then the existing concrete panels that run up and down the north and south, they were going to be replaced with precast concrete. And that's, I think, something that is still ongoing in terms of it's been conditioned, so the planning application has been granted, but we're still developing that with them now. So in terms of the floor plans, as I say, I won't go through every single floor. There's 10. There's quite a lot of stuff going on in the building, but broadly speaking, and this has evolved a bit further since. But we've got a cafe and a sort of social learning space at the ground floor, and then we've housed a biomechanics and neurophysiology workshop at or kind of laboratory at the back, and that utilizes some of the void space within the floor to mount some cameras for gait analysis. And then we've got a lot of plant space to serve the building. And then as you go up through, we've got specialist teaching labs. So we've got physiotherapy and podiatry on some of the sort of lower floors. So we tried to keep teaching on the lower floors and move office spaces up towards the higher floors, where you'd probably come and spend more time in an office and then leave at the end of the day, whereas teaching would be coming and going a lot more. Again, we've got optometry, so again, quite specialist teaching, and we've had to kind of think quite hard about how they were going to use the space. So you've got optometry studio, where you've got just simple analysis, but you've also got what we would consider your kind of Specsavers sort of eye examination bays. And then we've also thought about the nursing and midwifery. We've had to introduce sort of hospital simulation wards, and then think about how they can sort of do the pre-brief and debrief. So there's hospital simulation, but there's also immersive simulation, where you've got sort of live dummies that they can talk through and try and sort of simulate various ailments. So as I say, planning application went in with us all kind of agreeing some sort of fairly straightforward strategies. We knew we had to do some intrusive work. We knew we needed input from Kia at that point, who were appointed, but we put them on hold. And so it got to the point where planning was granted, and so we could start to progress the sort of stage 3 report and hand that over to Kia for them to develop. Sorry. As part of that, there was a bit of a pause then in the project in terms of negotiating a lease. So we were kind of tasked at that point with finalising the interior design and finalising an FF&E strategy. And there was a fair amount of legacy equipment, all quite complicated. And so we used a specialist health sort of supplier to survey it all. We went and spent more time with them and worked through it all to work out what it was, where it went, and scheduled it all out. But we also started to think about the interior strategy. And as I said earlier, there were some great features within that existing building, existing fabric that we wanted to sort of draw upon. And so we developed quite a 60s design that was also sort of slightly Scandi related, but also trying to introduce some biophilic design. One of the things we were also trying to do was, so I probably skipped over this, but we were targeting Scar Gold. We were close to hitting it, but we were having to hit some sort of find ways of trying to improve that, but also trying to make the building as sort of green and sustainable as possible. So some biophilic design was something, trying to improve biodiversity was something the council had sort of really encouraged us to do. So we had some some planting on the 10th floor on the outside, but we also wanted to try and integrate that into the internal strategy. So the stair cores, as I say, were they've wanted to sort of use this strong yellow colour, part of that 60s sort of theme, and they wanted to kind of retain as much of the terrazzo flooring and the quality of that 60s building, so it felt like a sort of 60s building, or arced back to the kind of original sort of concepts of the building. And so the cafe is something that we've managed to keep in as part of this social learning space at the ground floor, and that sort of living wall at the back is something we want to develop further as part of the kind of integration of the sort of trying to get some sort of biodiversity into the project. So I think August 2020, a lease was signed, so it took a fair bit of time to get to that point. And once we got to that point, Kier could get in and start developing their stage 4 design with more intrusive surveys. And it's sadly at that point that some of our original strategies were kind of, we had to revisit, let's say. Certainly things like sort of a centralized plant system for air handling units on the roof wasn't going to work. We weren't going to be able to route new risers down through the building. So actually it sort of works a bit better, but NVHR system sort of within the cladding system that sort of basically brings tempered air through the facade into the space and is then localized to each space rather than doing it sort of centrally, was a neater solution, and actually is a more sustainable solution, as those units are very efficient. It also meant sort of mechanically ventilating each toilet block, so they're all within the south core, and so doing that locally rather than doing that as a centralized system. But that did kind of then free up other spaces to integrate PV on the roof, for example. The other thing that scuppered us a bit more was the fire strategy, and I think somewhere along the lines missed a trick with building control, and it originally wasn't going to be classed as a change of use, and so we'd all progressed on the basis there were improvements needed, but it all was relatively straightforward. We had got to mist sprinkler the building, but we didn't need a full sprinkler system, and it was assumed that the concrete would kind of between floors would provide the right compartmentation and so on. When we did some of the intrusive surveys, we discovered that the building was not built quite as we'd assumed, and so actually the cover on the rebar wasn't quite sufficient, and it was now classed as a change of use. So there's ongoing work at the moment to look at ways to sort of improve that. It is very doable, but it just means a slight change to the sort of overall strategy. And so as a result, we've had to borrow a bit of space in the basement to house some of the sprinkler tanks, which probably further complicated the lease negotiation, I have no doubt. End result is a building that actually still looks very similar to the kind of mica original design. As you can see, we've got MVHR louvers now rather than a sort of natural vent louver, and some of the work to the 10th floor was, as we suspected, not particularly viable. So that's not going to go ahead. But otherwise, the building is really starting to take shape. And I've already touched on it, but we did manage to get some PV onto the roof, and so all of that is starting to sort of inform the SCAR Gold score. I wanted to just say it's still very much part of the wider master plan. As you can see, it's now part of the kind of imagery as part of that master plan, and I think it's a really great opportunity for Plymouth and part of the this gateway to Britain's ocean city. In this instance, you've got the old multi-storey car park, and clearly that's going to go. That's probably an example of creative reuse where that structure isn't much good for really repurposing as a building. And I think that's where you've got to, in terms of creative reuse, you've got to be realistic about that building and what you can achieve with it, and its sort of purpose. It's sort of how you can remodel it and so on. So I think sometimes it isn't always appropriate, but we are on site. Kia are well on with the enabling works. They're stripping out some of the asbestos and starting to sort of strip back the building. Eventually they'll put up the scaffold as part of that, and the scaffold is a complex design in itself. Being so close to the railway, we've had to develop a BAPA with Network Rail, and all of that's quite complex, so we have to cantilever the scaffold from the frame itself, so there's no, we've got to fully maintain that railway concourse at all times. So I think this is really what I'm trying to say, is it's clearly, if we can do it here, there's probably no other building in Plymouth that can't sort of be retrofitted and reused. So I want to just sort of summarize some of the advantages of creative reuse. The saving in embodied carbon for that structural frame is sort of second to none. I've got a brief stat at the end, so I won't spoil that, but I think it's also important to say we're sort of preserving our history, and that 1960s building, that 1960s frame, that sort of architectural presence, it's important to preserve some of that. Maybe not all of it, but I think it's great to do what we can, and I think that adds social value to what we're doing as a profession, as a construction industry. It's nice to be able to save some of that character as well. If we kind of knocked that down, no doubt we'd build back something that had no character, that had no sort of history to it. So it's great to be able to save some of that. In essence, it should be a reduction in capital cost. Maybe this one might not be, but this one's been very challenging. But it will certainly reduce waste, and it will certainly reduce life cycle cost. This building is now good for another 100 years. So the life cycle cost of that is pretty good, I would say. I have to sort of suggest that Scar Gold is also a really good kind of assessment criteria, I think, or assessment method of sort of refitting old buildings. It's very pragmatic, and it really kind of hones in on the things that matter. I'm sort of comparing that to BREEAM, where I think sometimes that gets bogged down with things that they're sustainable, but are think about longer term. I would question that. I think it's a new opportunity for Plymouth. I think it's a great landmark building, and I think it's saving a building in a perfect location for kind of nurses and students all over Devon and Cornwall. They haven't got to travel. It's a sustainable location. I think I'd also like to share some of the lessons we've learned, because I think, I want to encourage others to do this. I'd certainly say getting survey information as soon as possible, and that really needs to be intrusive. From our point of view, a Revit survey or a survey pretty crucial. Just as I was saying, the Lighthouse lab we've done was we used a Matterport, and that can't sort of emphasize how useful that was. Prepared to compromise, it's absolutely critical. University discussing numerous things, and all as consultants with Mace and Kia as well. It really, compromise is key, but we've sort of fleshed out the really important things, and I think we're delivering them. So I think it's really possible. You have to commit time, and I mean these projects are not simple. Going whole hog, they're harder, they need more input, but I think generally that saving in capital and in sort of
I think we may have
this
just
building
lost.
is only one of many. And so I wanted to just say we're already doing some great things in Plymouth. Civic Centre's going to be one of them. I think we've got one of the world's best examples of creative reuse at sort of the Royal William Yard. But I would add that the listed building probably helps a little bit. I think sometimes we get it slightly wrong, though. This is a personal opinion, but the Hoe Centre, the original sort of School of Architecture, and way before that, I think it was, it's just a lovely building that I know was sort of structurally pretty unsound, but it was knocked down and student accommodation built in its place. And I just think could the student accommodation have gone somewhere else and we saved this building for some other purpose? Who knows? But there are many other opportunities in Plymouth. The Money Centre is one I've heard of recently that's going to happen. So I think clearly we're onto the right sort of thing in terms of we've got structure, we've got some great ability, and we need to really encourage that as a sort of set of consultants. So just to leave you with a couple of key facts, this is just one of many 1960s buildings, part of the city centre, and I think we should and keep that kind of Abercrombie plan. It's such a good city structure that we really need to just continue to work on it and enhance it. To give you just one little fact, the UK construction industry produces 40% of our total emissions. Of those are embodied carbon from any sort of projects. So that's really blooming high. And I picked up on recently was over old, you're paying 20% VAT refurbishing an existing building, whereas you don't pay that on a little things like that, just mind-boggling really. But I think what can we do? I think we have to sort of work to reuse, and I think we have to happen. We can't wait at home and make it possible. Where it, yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. Really interesting presentation. Looking forward to seeing that building come back to life in the lovely Abercrombie style as well. Fantastic. Thank you very much. So we're going to move on to the Q&A session now. If you have any more questions, please get them in now by raising your hand or pressing the Q&A button. Just want to say, as usual, a big thank you to our headline sponsors. Big thank you actually to Plymouth City Council, which has now joined us as a sponsor, and for their continued support for the series. Thank you very much. European Union, of course, the University of Plymouth, HM Government, REBA, and Sustainability Hub, Low Carbon Devon Project. We also have loads of partners on our website, futureplymouth2030.co.uk, so please have a look. And if you would like to become a sponsor as well, we'd love to have you involved. We have lots of things planned for the series going forward. So please email us at hello@futureplymouth.co.uk. I'm just going to bring our speakers back. They're already actually back. That's Paul. I'm going to bring you on this one, David. As there's been a lot of discussion in the chat. There's been a question. Have a look. From Lisa, and also if you could, the other panelists could probably echo what they've been saying. So Lisa said a large part of the UK's housing stock is mid-20th century flat blocks. The usual way that these are retrofitted is by overcladding, and this requires the whole block to agree to this or be imposed by the management company. Internal insulation is discouraged, meaning individuals are disempowered to do anything about their poorly insulated flats. Therefore, these are less likely to get energy and efficiency improvements and increasingly be a problem. So how can this be dealt with in design or policy? I know we've had a few responses from other panelists, but what would you say about that, David?
Gosh, I think that having lived in a block of apartments myself, just trying to do simple things, get buy-in from all of the different sort of leaseholders in this instance, having seen it firsthand. So I don't really know, if I'm brutally honest. I think there's really got to be a kind of a national effort to sort of put things in place to kind of try and be resolved, doable. But it almost it needs more than just buying something more behind it to drive that change, and it kind of needs, and I think it needs to be more than just to be looking at it's the windows, it's the insulation, it's the air tightness, it's the heating, district heating, things like that. There are, integration of renewables. There's overcladding, and it's a disappointment that, if anything, overcladding's a bad name, and I think that was a start of something. But yeah, we've got a lot of work to do on a lot of buildings as well.
Thanks, David. Yeah, would you like to say you'll echo your points, Paul, on that question?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's interesting. We've just done a piece of work at some flats, not high-rise flats. They're kind of low-story, 4 or 5 stories at Raglan Court, and we've put, I say we, the council have found funds along with others to do some work of external wall insulation and actually gas central heating as well, which is contrary to the aims of what we've just talked about. But for the people in the flats who were using, I don't know, 1970s storage heaters and not really being able to afford to keep warm, it makes a real big life difference. And there's an interesting conflict between saving the planet on one side and for the fuel poor in a city, which let's not forget, number about 13,000 households, keeping them alive in some cases. It's a difficult conflict to get, but clearly you've got someone looking at you in the face. It's an immediate need, and you have to try and address that as well as a local authority, and I suppose as human beings as well, we would. But flats is tricky, and the comment I made in the chat box was that using EPCs as a gauge isn't particularly helpful, because flats often score fairly well on EPCs because they've got heated properties above, below, to the side, and the EPCs, as Tim has very accurately pointed out, don't really work. So if you're using that as a driver, and therefore eligibility for maybe some help, some funding, it's not going to help. But yeah, where you've got different ownership, people are people, it's not going to be easy necessarily.
Thanks, Paul. Would you like to add anything to that, Tim?
Yeah, difficult. Depends on ownership and a huge number of factors. Every flat is, there are lots of them are the same sort of ownership models and management systems, but I pointed out in one of my answers in the writing that many of them are owned by councils and housing associations, which does help sometimes if you want to go for a whole building approach, and it gives security for the residents. But where it comes to individuals, it's much more challenging. I suggest that you might be able to use the Retrofit approach to improve the internals of individual flats if it's allowed, and prepare it for the future. And that's what I was trying to sort of point out towards the end of my presentation, that you can do steps towards this that aren't necessarily the whole thing in one go, but they'll make a difference. And if you use a system like Retrofit, it will make sure that it's all the right thing, and they're not going to be wasted.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you all for that. David Felicity asks, what was the sprinkler system considered for fire control for the building? Will it be, what will be the future estimated lifespan after the upgrade?
Okay, so originally we were looking at a mist. The change of use requirement, the fire separation and compartmentation was a lot higher. So we're then looking at a full sprinkler system, which I don't know the details of as such, but it would be a full sort of fully designed new sprinkler tanks, hence the need to put them in the basement. We did look at putting them elsewhere in the building and trying to pump the water and trying to split them up, but the structure wasn't sort of beefy enough to take a huge mass of water. You can't really rely on mains either. So yeah, there was a lot of challenges involved in introducing a full sprinkler system. But yeah, it was a must as part of the meeting the building regulations.
Seems a lot of challenges
in terms of how, yeah, in terms of the sort of longevity of that. So I'd imagine it will probably need a bit of work in that time, sort of 40, 50 years at least of without much need for intervention.
Thanks, David.
Good maintenance.
A question from Jamie, so for all the panel actually. So how do we encourage developers and clients to choose a more sustainable source in providing renewable energy infrastructure for new homes in the domestic sector? Paul, would you like to take that first?
Okay. So I mean, hands up, I'm not a planner, and I like existing buildings more than I like new ones. But well, from a local perspective, it's not that easy. We're governed by national planning policy. We can put in place set conditions in terms of looking at the viability of a development, for example. But at the same time, we're bound by effectively the law, I suppose. So you have government statements around banning gas boilers from 2030 new builds. I mean, that's going to help with this issue clearly. But when you're a city whose target of climate neutrality is 2030, working with government policy whose target is 2050, you're effectively trying to do something that is 3 times quicker than nationally is trying to be achieved. And so at a local level, from my understanding, and as I say, I'm not a planner, so don't quote me on this, but my understanding is it's quite tricky, I think, to enforce anything over and above what is laid down in that kind of national planning policy framework.
Thanks, Paul. Do you have anything to add to that, Tim?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think like all these things, with the whole issue at hand is gargantuan, and I think Paul, you sort of mentioned this in one of the chats there, that we're not getting huge government guidance or direction, or it's sort of being led by the industry with piecemeal investment. We need, this is a massive issue that we're dealing with here. There's a huge number of homes which don't meet any of these regulations or energy efficiency targets, and there's just simply not enough leadership from the top, in my opinion. We need a lot more. We need consistency as well. We've had lots of piecemeal attempts at sort of the Green Deal and all that sort of thing, but they've all sort of fallen by the wayside without much success or fanfare. We need somebody to really drive this, but who's going to put their head on the chopping block and say, yeah, I'm going to invest billions of pounds in something that's not going to make us any money in the short term? Tough one.
Thanks, Tim. Do you want anything to add to that, David? We're struggling with your feed at the moment. I think everybody's on the internet tonight, it seems. No, we're going to struggle.
So anything? Can you not hear me at all?
It's a little bit ropey. Maybe turn off your video, I would say, David, to see if we can get any better.
The train line, and I've got one, I think. Can you hear me?
We can hear. That's better. Yeah, that's better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe not. We'll come back to you, David. I'd just like to.
I think when trains go past, they.
We're gonna struggle with Dave. Sorry about that. I'd just like to bring in Emma Hewitt if she's still there. Emma, are you with us?
Hi, Miles.
Hi, Emma. Now Emma's going to be with us in a few weeks for our webinar on behaviour change. I'd just like to do, and there's a lot of chat going on with yourself and Paul. We'd just like to probably echo that, and also you're doing you're working on the green skills plan for the climate emergency for Plymouth, aren't you, at the moment?
I am, yeah. So just listening to the conversation this evening, obviously I'm not a construction expert, but really keen to understand how this agenda is going to drive different demands for skills. And I'm just thinking about the volume of houses, as well as all the other, citywide properties that will need significant focus on refitting. And just sort of thinking, what does that mean for the current construction workforce in terms of upskilling and retraining existing, players in the construction field? Clearly, we've got some experts that have been speaking tonight, and also thinking about the new entrants, because it just strikes me that there's loads of potentially new job opportunities, different careers that we've never had available, and how, what do we need to do in terms of, working with our young people in the education system, talking to them positively about careers in green. Many young people are really enthused about, sustainability and really concerned over climate change. And how could we enthuse young people to think about joining construction and accessing quite different jobs that perhaps we offer today? And, immediately thinking about the current workforce and kind of what we could do, what funding investment do we need to upskill and retrain the existing workforce? So, more architects, more, not just the builders, but actually the professional services side of construction as well. What is it we need to do? And, I'm hoping we can flesh that out over the next few weeks. And then when I speak later in March, kind of start unpacking that really in terms of how, it goes back to a big question. Paul presented a kind of model there about costs and, timeline and passion, getting things done, but also who's going to do this stuff and how are we going to make that happen? So I would say it'd be really good to get feedback from anyone on the call in terms of skills. I've signed up for that community event that was promoted a bit earlier, so thank you, Grant, for highlighting that. But I'm really keen to hear from you if you've got views on skills for the existing workforce in construction, and also those in terms of bringing new entrants in and what that means. So yeah, looking forward to my conversation with Paul as well on picking up the sort of barriers to making some of this happen. So this is a massive job creation opportunity if that consistency of funding could get lined up. So really happy to hear from anyone who's interested in that agenda. Thanks, Miles.
Emma. Thanks, Emma. What's your initial thoughts on that, Paul?
Yeah, well, I've talked a little bit with Emma before, actually, to be fair. So, but I can't echo enough, as I did in the chat, that we there is a huge opportunity here in so many different themes, for want of a better expression. I've long been an advocate of you improve housing quality, and it does so much in different areas. Like even before climate change was so big on the agenda, it was part of a massive public health. Let's think 2000, we ran a scheme which where the NHS, believe it or not, funded us to go into people's homes who had asthma and look at the quality of their environment, and could we do anything to help with the damp and the mold and the ventilation in that home to reduce the pressure on NHS. That was 21 years ago, and we're still banging that same drum, even though we've got countless results that show the benefits of improving the housing sector, getting domestic retrofit, up on the agenda and doing it. Now it's even bigger. We've got the whole skills opportunity. We've got the whole climate emergency. The case for this is more compelling than I know of any other, really. And at the same time, we don't have a government who, and I'm not government bashing on purpose here, but you get commitment to build a railway that runs from London to Manchester within hours difference. over current and at a cost of over £1 billion. The opportunity for domestic retrofit, for that to become a national infrastructure priority, would shift the balance of how this is approached as a country. You know, it's piecemeal at the minute, as Emma has alluded to. So yeah, bit of a soapbox, but you know, there's a massive opportunity, and I'm like Emma, really keen to tap into whatever we can do to grasp it.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Paul.
I chip in and completely agree with you, Paul, and that is that there's too little appreciation of what this issue is within government, and again, too little direction. You know, it is a national infrastructure issue. You know, it might not be a railway, it's not so glamorous, but you know, until somebody in government recognises the fact that they have to address this, you know, there's no other choice. It has to come from government, because the amount of investment required is probably never going to come out of the private sector on its own, in my opinion. They really need to address that.
Yeah, and also, just to finish the soapbox rant, so we're talking quite kind of infrastructure and physical bits of improvement, but socially, you know, you get someone's home right. This is a place where we all spend the most amount of time, regardless of whether we're asleep in it or awake in it. Everybody spends most of their living life at home or in some building or
especially
other.
at the moment.
Especially at the moment, right? Look at me, I'm in a box. I mean, you know, so if we get this right, if we get people's homes right, other factors start to fall in line. I'm not saying it's the answer to all our social ills, but it's a key component of addressing lots of social challenges. And it seems like it's recognised, but it's just not actioned on. So yeah, that's my rundown.
Thanks, Paul. David, if you're there, do you have anything to add to that?
I am here, if you can hear.
We could hear you. Good.
I think we've all got to sort of action it ourselves a little bit. We've got to kind of, a bit like I kind of touched on at the end of my talk, is just as consultants, clients, we've got to work. You've got to start somewhere, right? And I think that we've got to work with them to instigate change. I think we've got to do a lot to sort of really engage with local community. I don't think we do anywhere near enough. I think Paul alluded to the fact that actually, if you start talking to people, they start to understand it. And I think things like this are the right thing to start doing. So those are the kind of things I think we should be doing. I think it's within our own grasp and our own power to make small change. I don't think we need to wait for legislation. I think we'll wait forever if we did that. It would be too late.
Yeah, very true. Thanks, David. And also, just to point out, Grant kindly put a link to the Green Skills and Smart Citizens Fab Lab event and Green Minds having meet up on the 17th of March. There is a link in the chat if you'd like to join that one as well. And also another question for you, Paul, from Grant as well, actually. You said about the potential 59% in energy use in early evenings. What are the possibilities of a local energy storage are being looked at to reduce this imbalance?
I'm not sure what that was. If I did say about 59% in energy use in early evenings, don't know. But you know, energy battery storage, you know, is definitely part of the mix, whether it's at domestic level or huge shipping container level next to some solar array that's being built. You know, there's this wonderful theory of, you know, almost no power stations really required, because actually, or storage, because actually we'll all be driving electric vehicles and they'll plug in at night and you know, power the home, and then the sun will come out, and we only use electric vehicles for 4% of the time or something. So the 96% of the time they're not being used, they're either generating or giving back, or, you know, either charging or giving back. And that's a wonderful vision. It's a bit of a utopian vision. There's lots of barriers to that happening, but at the same time, it illustrates the point that, you know, there will need to be a big shift in how we use power. And so battery storage, absolutely. In terms of whether it's being looked at for you know, for the city, it's considered in the round. I don't know any specific, you know, projects or or details of any particular investments that are being made in that, but it's certainly got to be part of the mix, whether that's in an individual household or business or citywide level. Yeah.
Definitely. Thanks, Paul. And a question from Jamie. So what are the challenges in upgrading and retrofitting high-rise buildings such as InterCity Place when having to comply with the latest building regulation requirements? That's quite a big question. David, are you able to start on an answer for that one?
I think the biggest one for us was, as I touched on, is fire. That trying to resolve that is doable, but has taken a lot of work and a lot of time and effort to work that through. The envelope and so on is not so hard. I was going to touch on it, but we've had to take off the concrete upstands, so the slab is almost like a U shape with concrete upstands that hold the existing cladding in place, and so we're having to take the concrete upstands away to reduce the weight, introduce a new sort of modern facade with a DU value and decent sort of air tightness, and one that doesn't leak so much. So there are some significant challenges, but they're definitely ones we can resolve, and then we can integrate sort of renewables and so on as part of that. So yeah, all of the sort of standard building reg sort of challenges that we would normally expect to face are there. They're slightly escalated in that instance on a high-rise existing building, but they're very resolvable. It just needs time and effort.
Thanks, David. And just one final question. I think we've kind of covered this a little bit, but how will local planning authorities and the Nppf encourage people to retrofit properties in general? Tim, would you like to?
I would be very careful about what I say, but perhaps not that much, and certainly within a national park, which we experienced, it was perhaps actively discouraged. I wouldn't like to say that it wasn't consciously so, but the policies that were in place made it much more challenging. I think it's probably difficult to combine planning specifically with refurb at the moment. I mean, if you're doing a refurb of a building to make it more energy efficient, it may not have any impact on planning. I mean, if you're talking about external insulation and such like, then we're starting getting towards that. And I don't see any particular issues with that, apart from in areas like conservation areas, which are, well, I mean, that's, you're dealing with the same problems like we had on Archton in some ways, and it is possible, but it just gets more expensive. It's a big question. Sorry, I haven't got a very clear answer on that.
Thank you, Tim. I'd like to, if Katherine, are you there? She just commented in the chat. I'd just like to see if you could just maybe echo your comment. I thought it was quite good. Hi, Katherine, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah, you would just your comment.
Yeah, just picking up. So I'm Katherine Butler. I'm an associate planner at Stride Treglown. I'm a colleague of Dave's. Just picking up some of the comments around how planning interplays with these issues, and just picking up on the fact that at the minute for new builds, there are quite a lot of new policies coming forward for pretty onerous and high BREEAM standards to be met. The problem, as we're all focused on talking about at the minute, is looking at the whole raft of new sort of changes of uses of buildings coming forward, and how they're not subject to the same rigorous requirements. And actually there is, in my view, a vacuum in terms of the standards and the resulting poor standards of accommodation that are coming out from, say, office to resi permitted development schemes. So there has been quite a lot of, I think, some lobbying from the design side, from planners on the latest government planning white paper, in terms of introducing more onerous requirements to meet better energy standards for conversions to residential. The opportunities are there. It's just pushing it, as you say. We've got to set better standards.
Yeah. Would you agree with that, Paul?
I mean, it's not my area of expertise, to be perfectly honest, and I don't want to comment on something that I don't really know a lot about. Suffice to say, I appreciate both the challenges from a developer point of view, and also the challenges back from a local authority point of view in looking at bringing forward developments. But where reuse is concerned, and we've just had a great presentation from David about the benefits of reusing existing buildings. Where reuse is concerned, it should be made as smooth as possible, I think, for development to go ahead. It makes sense, given whatever other constraints might be faced by the local authority. That's my caveat get outlined.
Would you like to add anything to that, David or Tim?
I don't know. I think planning policy and planning in general is a very complex affair these days, and I'm not sure there's anything so simple as to just say there's one stop shop and how to fix it. But anything that makes the refurbishment of buildings easier and quicker and probably cheaper, and that includes the time frame it takes to get planning, is got to be beneficial. So if that could be achieved, it would be great.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you, Katherine. Thanks for coming on. Thank you very much. So I'm afraid we run out of time. I just want to say a big thank you to all our guests, David Banner, Paul Elliott and Tim Mitchell. It's just time for me to remind you of our next webinar. So please join us on the 20th of March, same time, 4 till 6 again. This time it's going to be behaviour change and psychology. So please sign up for your place on Future Plymouth 2030. Do it now, get it out of the way, and we'll see you then. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
When we were young, tell them we were young. We never get discouraged. Read between the lines. When we were young, if only we were young. We never get nervous. It's all on the line. And if I were you, this life would be killing me. It's a goddamn lie. Hold it inside. When we were young, if only we were young. Keep getting over and all the things we tried. When we were young, tell me we were young. And it's hard to get inward when you're out of your mind. And if I were you, life would be killing me. It's a goddamn lie. Hold it inside. When we were young, tell me we were young. And and all of us are awkward in a matter of time. When we were young, they told us we'd